So before, does anybody have any questions? Has everybody had a chance to go through everything? All right. Like I said, so they have 2 weeks on inventory, and we'll have more to talk about it next week. But I figure this was a good time to kind of go through, because one of the biggest things that I see is just a lack of familiarity with Excel, and not from y'all, but I'm talking about in the people that I manage, and the difference between those that stick with the transactional data and those that end up um, excelling and I see in future positions. Uh, as I've mentioned with the accounting information system, there's a reason why Microsoft did better for 20 years before Apple finally got the iPhone. The Microsoft had won the business realm, and still today, it is majority held in all finance roles because of the fact that they were able to make Excel look like exactly what they were doing. Used to, all this was done on pen and paper. KPMG still did paper audits up until 2005, I believe, which I know seems like so long ago for y'all, but it was a time, and because of the familiarity that you have with Excel, all of your accounting information systems are going to be in a user-friendly format, based off of users that know Excel. So when you spend your time on QuickBooks, the view, the format, the toggles, all of that is meant to mirror Excel. And the reason why Excel worked and has become so widely used is that at the end of the day, all of these fancy systems, people pay millions of dollars for these fancy systems, and then at the end of the day, somebody just wants them to export into an Excel file so they can do what they're used to doing. So I was the finance manager for Chuck E. Cheese. At the end of the day, the report that we gave to our senior managers, who were deciding to go out with an IPO at the time, was in Excel. Um, so I can't stress the importance of just being familiar, um, being able to use Excel like you would your right hand. And when I talk about dealing with Excel, there's always three ways of doing something in Excel. You can use the menu options, the file, and we'll go through the ribbon and all that. You can use the right click, and you have the copy paste, all of those short keys, or there's a hot button for it. I didn't get a chance to. I'll get my short key that I used to have. The hotkeys, there's a lot of people that will tell you, only use the hotkeys, or they're very Excel connoisseurs. I don't prescribe to that methodology. Sometimes it's easier for me to go into the file and copy. It's based off of what you're doing at the time and where your mouse is already. But what I suggest is for each week, pick one of the methods, one of the short keys, and learn how to do what you're used to doing in a different method. So that way, when you get to that stage where it's 2 in the morning and you're working on different Excel files, and because you're now an audit intern, if if you're familiar with the different ways of doing it, your brain and your mind will already tell you how to use it. It's that muscle memory, just like you work out in order to go on the field. Um, and, and you'll learn that while you're working through whatever it is you're doing, knowing the different ways, it's going to be more efficient to do it one way than the other. And just get used to that, to where you're not stuck. You don't want to get to the point where you're only using your mouse. Um, some people will tell you only use your keyboard with your laptop, because they're supposed to be your hands right there. And some people will tell you to ignore the ribbon altogether. But to me, but based off of what it is I'm doing, if I know how to use all three methods, then my muscle memory will tell me to do it. Now, if you've done it the same way every single time, your brain might initially tell you that it's faster to do it this way, which is why at this stage, train yourself to do it another way. So that way, because sometimes taking the 10 minutes now just to save 10 seconds later, well, if you're doing that task 200 times, that 10 seconds adds up to that 10 minutes that you put in front. So does that make sense on why I'm going through that? Like I said, and I spent a year each week. This was the short key for the week, and I would figure out a new way of using that. And if you've ever seen me work in Excel, you'll see that those 10 minutes that I spent at that time are well worth it. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll start. The reason Excel excelled was because it was so easy to get any export from any other of the accounting information system in there. Of course, now that I'm in recording, and that's one thing with demonstrations is it never works on the time you want to. So the reason it was so easy to do that is because Excel early on was able to create a way to convert text files into the same format that we were used to using things on the pen and paper. And I say I was right at the first generation to never have used a pen and paper ledger, but I did learn how to do one. So the first thing is when you have a text file or a CSV file, you're going to want to be able to import it in. When you get to the stage now, Excel is very familiar. I can already use the default setups, and it's going to look the way that I want it to look based off of what accounting information system you're using, where you're getting this data from. This text file that I'm opening right now is available on the Blackboard under Module 10. So for those that are wanting to do it along with me, I dropped this text file in there. So it's called testing. You can save it and follow along. Sorry. When you're importing, Excel will import any text, CSV file. It's going to automatically try to sort the data for you. The question is delimited or fixed width. So what that means is how your data is actually separated. The standard, the computer language is delimited. And what that means is that where our eyes see a blank, the computer will fill that blank in because, again, a computer language only knows off and on. And so the computer will have to fill in a blank with a certain character. We'll go into what characters are used most commonly in a second, but another way, if your text file was always in a viewer format, you might get this fixed width. And in either of these options, once you click the open to get this wizard, you can decide if it has headers or not. You can go into this view pane. It's very useful to just do a quick check to make sure that it did translate what you were wanting it to before you hit finish. Because once you hit finish, you won't be able to go back into this wizard. You'd have to close out and start again. This text file happened to be tab delimited, which meant that the text translated each new column based off of what we view as a tab. Certain data comes with semicolons, commas, spaces. It depends. Again, the key is when you open your file, go through and view what each of these does, and based off of what you know of the text, make sure it looks right, and then you hit finish. And it's really as simple as that. But just this task eliminated quite a lot of wasteful time because people were just rekeying in data from one file to the next. So again, that right there is why Excel became so useful, just by simply getting the data into a usable format. All right, any questions on that part?
It's not,
It's not letting you download it. Let me know if that worked. Should be in your emails now. Heard some vibrating, so it sounded like you got that. Okay. Again, most of the time now they have the CSV file, which is just a fancy text file that's already delimited to the point where Excel doesn't need to go through that tutorial. You just hit OK. But any text files, you can even save HTML sites into that. So the next thing is formatting. The first thing that I always do is just highlight everything and then just do that double click. It automatically formats each of the columns and the rows into the width that I need just to be able to see. This data, I just wanted something to manipulate, so I went out and got the 2019 historic rates for the U.S. Treasury. Whatever data you're working with, it's your responsibility to figure out what the relationship, what those headers are. That's going to be the key, because at the end of the day, we do want it in the sense of these are just numbers, and once they're numbers, we can manipulate them. But the number, if the numbers don't mean anything, then whatever you do to them won't mean anything. So know what the relationships are. If it's regions, if it's different warehouses, if it's different sales codes. The best thing you can do before you start manipulating the data is just understand, where's this data coming from? Who are you sending it to? A lot of the system analysis and consulting that I did was just clarifying those facts, because businesses get wrapped into their own day-to-day, that they forget the big picture. And so the simplest thing you need to do is figure out, where is your data coming from? How are you getting it? What are you doing to it? And then who is it going to? Once that's settled, then you can start in the manipulation form. So the first thing that I like to show is just different sort and filters options. Right now, I can tell you that my headers aren't going to like an auto filter here, because of the fact that the headers are above this. So that's another thing, is to make sure all your headers are on one line. Sometimes that means going through and manipulating it. At this point, I didn't need most of that. It'll come up in a second. So here at the top is each of the ribbons. You'll see I have a few different more because of things, but learn each of the ribbons. It helps to go through. Now, these changed each of the upgrades. They based off of the what's being used more often. And nowadays, the ribbons themselves will change based off of what you yourself use often. A lot of useful things. And again, this right here is the one of the three ways of performing your task. Anything that you do here, you could eventually get to by just right clicking, or there's shortcut hotkeys to do it. But at the end of the day, if you, it doesn't hurt to just go to the source of it. So what I like to do is just go put to the data, and then I can create my filters. Now I can sort by this option as well, but I just like to have my filters there. And so I'm not doing any advanced sorting. You will want to go to this. What I mean by advanced sorting is if you want to have more than one layer. So let's say this was a location in a region. I could choose to sort by one column and then another. So in this instance, there's only one date for each, but if there was more than one date, I could sort it by date, and then I can sort it by largest to smallest. You'll note that it already went from oldest to newest, largest to smallest here, because of the fact that when it converted, it knew that this column was a date. That's part of the import. Sometimes if you notice that this is going to go, if it's asking you largest to smallest here, and you know this is a date, go back to your import and change it to where that column is running as a date. A lot of the times the text values will come in, and sorry, what I mean by that. A lot of the times text values, because of a comma in the wrong place or a period, the upload, Excel believes that it's a text file, and in reality, it's a data file. So what you're going to want to do, okay, so right here, it's converting it to general because it still has that header. Once I deleted that second line item, it automatically converted it to date. But right here, I could go ahead and tell that this column is now a date. If when I'm trying to run the pivots, if it keeps treating these numbers as text, sometimes it'll treat a number as a text instead. I can go in there and put whether it's a text or if it's a general or a date, or I can get advanced with it and tell you that they're using a comma and stuff. Like I said, Excel 99% of the time will default to the correct answer. But just in case it doesn't, that's how you go through and modify your import. Because if it's treating it as a text, then it won't add up. And you see here, it's treating this as a date now because I went and manipulated it. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that real quick. And of course, now it's all ugly. Okay. And the easiest thing you can always do is just exit out and start over. Lesson number 1, right? Okay. So the next thing is just sorting and filtering it. So again, these numbers don't mean anything, but it's very easy once I have my filters there. I can now sort by this number, or I can filter for particular numbers. One task that we usually like to do with Excel is we'll take this set of the data and we'll compare it to this set of the data. So if I'm an auditor, I'm going through, and as I'm going through, I like to change my format and say, okay, I've checked this one off, I've checked this one off, I've checked this one off. This is fairly common, but what most people don't realize is now that I've put those filters there or put that format there, I can also sort by that format or filter by that format. So that right there has saved me a lot of time. Being if I'm comparing data, going through, or I'm validating, I can go through and say, okay, I've gotten all the green ones now, or if there are particular issues with them, all the green ones were perfect. All the yellow ones we matched but had a variance, and then the blue ones weren't in the system. You know, so now I can go through and sort and filter by that option. So that becomes very handy. And then again, I can filter for that option. Again, this data doesn't mean anything, but like I said, if I was checking off for different regions, I can filter it for those regions first. And then, you know, these sales were validated by the sales department. These sales haven't been entered yet. It becomes very, very helpful. Okay. Another thing that becomes the second go-to is creating the filters with it. So once again, because of the way that I've set up my data, I can just highlight the whole thing, hit my data, hit my insert, pivot table. Now at this point, again, 99% of the time, Excel will already know what you want to do. So at this point, you can just hit OK. But going through this pivot table, the first box is asking you, where is your data? With a pivot table, your first row always has to be a header, because that's what's going to be telling the pivot what are the parameters. In that header, this one's going to give us an error because of the fact that multiple columns have the same description. So you see column C and column E are both coupon equivalent. Well, if I threw that into the pivot table and I use coupon equivalent as one of my parameters, Excel wouldn't know which column to add here. So not only do you need to have a header, but you need to have a defined header. If I deleted the text altogether and tried to insert my pivot table, I get an error because every column has to have a header, and it has to have a unique descriptive header. Once we define what our data is, note it doesn't even have to be in this file. I can go to an external source, and that is typically one of the business system setups that we do, is we figure out a way for the accounting system to export a text file directly to either a SharePoint site, a shared web mail address, you know, some folder out there, and then we create these macros and these system tools to go in and pull that directly. So I don't need to have my data in this file if there's an external source set up for it. And then where the first part is what data do you want, and the second part is where do you want it to be placed. So the default is a new worksheet. If this is the second pivot table, you can add it to a specific area, and then that you just go to the existing and then go find where you want to place it. Okay. So again, I'm okay with the current default. And if you see, it accepted the duplicate names, but it went ahead and defaulted to add a number there, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Those that are following along, can y'all get to this point with me? Says what? Okay. But you can see something like this. All right, is this too basic for y'all? Do I need to get more advanced, or is this being helpful now that we're about a little bit more than halfway? Do y'all see this as helpful? Okay. Y'all are the ones paying tuition, so I want to make sure y'all are getting what you're getting out of it. Okay. Once you're in this field, again, what called this on is that I had a call with the CEO on the call and another analyst, and I gave him a very simple question, which all he had to do was go in there and drop this pivot table, and literally that's what I wanted him to do. But it took me 15 minutes to explain that. So I'm giving y'all this information now so that way you don't annoy your future boss. When you get into, so this is the pivot table fields. If it doesn't come up automatically, then when you click anywhere on the pivot table, you go to Analyze, Field List right here. This is the bread and butter. This is where the easiest way to quickly and concisely consolidate your data. There are those that will try to use the subtotals. Delete any subtotals you ever find in any of your Excel files. The reason why is because when you convert those subtotals to anywhere outside of Excel, those subtotals are actually adding text into your file, and not all of the future uses of that data will be able to pull out those subtotals. So I don't recommend ever adding subtotals. That, and once you've added subtotals, you can only add a subtotal per that one field. If at any point you want to change the view, those subtotals won't work. So learn your pivot table. The new hip thing, I guess, is the slicers. The slicer is just a pivot table. The only difference is your field list, instead of it being here, when I go through and create a slicer for this data, which it's been so long. I don't even remember how to do slicers. I know once I'm in here. All the slicer is the field list, but it keeps this up as a separate screen. What that does is it allows the data. So once I've done my work and I've prepared it the way that I want it prepared, and I give it to the next person, having the slicer there is like keeping this menu up to where now the next person can go through and manipulate and add. Let's say I'm giving him option 1, but he wanted option 2s and 3s. That's all fine, but if you're doing what you're doing, then the person that you're doing this for shouldn't have to do anything else. And that's a general rule of thumb. If someone's telling you to do something, then the goal is to do it without them having to do anything else. So I do not use slicers. But they are the same template format, follow the same rules as your pivot table. It's just a little bit more flair that I guess people want these days. So what your pivot table is you have 4 different fields. You have the filters, the columns, the rows, the values. You'll notice that each of the headers was brought in here automatically. So now the question is just how do you want to look at your data? So the first box here, this filters, will tell you what to exclude. So if I want all of January's, all of a particular month, let's say I want everything that was done on the 23rd, I can now filter it exactly for that. If I want more than all of the 23rds, then I need to click this select multiple, and it's going to pick all of these. Or if I wanted all of January's, right there. So again, what that does is it quickly filters down to where the data that I'm showing now will only match the data that's boxed. So again, imagine if this is regions, locations, a particular product, you can generate this and already have it filtered down to a specific field. From there, you have the columns and the rows. So again, it's not going to make much sense here, but if that was my column and that was my row, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, and you can drag, drop, move these around as much as you want. Okay, the only thing is that you have to have at least one in the column or row, or no data is going to show up. If all I put is this value here, it's going to sum up all of that, but it's not really going to tell me much, right? All right, so then when I have my rows and my columns, then I can have my values. Okay, so the value, it'll default to either a sum or a count based off of if it's a text. Again, hopefully the data in there is reading as a numeric value, and so we can do more than that. If you do not like the default, there's the arrow right there. You can click on it, hit value field settings, and I can change that. So if I wanted to count how many times this sale was done or how many times this manager popped up in my field, I can go by count. If I wanted the average rate, so these are coupon rates for treasury bonds, I can go in and calculate the average. I use this to figure out your midterm, so the max, the min, the product. I can do any of the normal functions to collect the data. It's all right there. All right. Any questions? Again, pivot tables are going to be the most often used because you get this large set of data, and before you start manipulating it, you drop it into a pivot table. And once it's in a pivot table, the way that you view it, how do you want to see it? That's how it's going to come into view. Okay. Questions on that? Have y'all used pivot tables before? Again, the pivot tables are make or break. Be familiar with it. Just anytime you see a large set of data, just go play around with it in the pivot table. Learn how to move it from one side to the other. Let's say I have the pivot table. Me and my boss has figured out this is exactly how I want it to look like. And then next month I get a new set of data. I need to change my data source. Okay, so what I'm saying is this set of data is month 1, and now I have month 2. So what I wanted, and again, it's the same data, but if I wanted, so analyze, change data source, it's going to open this field back up of where do you want my data source. So right now it's pulling from testing. I want it to come and pull from sheet 2. All right, so now my data is in sheet 2. If I don't want to change the source forever, but let's say I went into sheet 2. Let's make it obvious. And let's say I change my data set. So on 1-2, I should have a bank discount of 10,000. So see right now it's not there because it's still pulling the data from when I first created the pivot table. When you first create the pivot table, at that point your data is frozen. But if you've changed your data and you want your data to refresh, you go in there and refresh it. And now you can see that that change has come through. See that? So a lot of times people ask, hey, I changed my data. Why isn't the pivot table updated? Again, the pivot table will take your data and it basically creates a copy of it in the background that you no longer see. And so if you want that background copy, to reflect the most recent information, you need to go back in there and refresh it. Either change the data source together, changing it again without changing it, we'll refresh it just the same. But yeah, okay. Any questions, comments, suggestions there? Okay. So then the problem, the drawback with pivot tables is that anytime I hit that change data, anytime I hit that refresh, it's going to delete everything and then put it back. That's the way the pivot table works, is that, and the way that I treat it is that the pivot table now owns this tab. So if I want to do something with this data, let's say I want to create an actual financial statement, a balance sheet. You don't want to create the balance sheet using the pivot table itself, because then every time you change your data and every time you refresh, all of your formatting, all of your formulas, anything you've built off of that in this tab is going to be deleted. And so what you're supposed to do, if you want to use this pivot table for anything in the future, you create a specific template tab, okay? And you pull whatever information you need off of this, okay? And so we're going to work on a few. Yep. We're going to work on a few ways of doing that, but in order to do that, I need my data to be a little bit smarter here. Okay, so one of the short keys that I'm going to teach you is how to drag the formulas around. But one thing that I showed you before is if you don't know the actual, so again, treat Excel like another language. You're going to have to learn how to talk to Excel. The way Excel talks is through functions. If you don't know exactly what the formula or function is, you click on that FX and it's going to go up. Here, I want to do a quick month formula, and what that means is I'm going to grab the information here, and it's going to give me a month. Okay, so and I want that in the text file. So what that means is this is now obviously January. Okay. Now there's a lot of ways. So I've created that formula here. If this was in a grid view, it would have already updated. There's a few ways that I can do that. I can go ahead and just double click there, and you can see that formula drags down. The drawback of that is I can't see exactly how far it drags down to. So I'm going to back it up. Now, this trick taught me a lot. It helped me a lot. So if I'm on a data set, I can hit End down, and it automatically goes to the bottom of my data set. And then I'm just going to shift over one. So I'm now at the bottom of the column that I need to drag that formula down to. This time I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to hit End up. See, it now highlighted everything up on the way. And then I'm going to hit Control D, and it's going to copy that formula all the way down. Okay. Control D.
For the going down to the bottom?
Yeah, End, END on your laptop. So you can, so if you hit End, then the next arrow you hit, it'll go to either, if you're on text, it'll go to the last text. If you're not on text, it'll go to the next text. Okay, so End, and then you hit your arrow key, and again, it'll go to either the last text, or if you're on a blank spot like here, it'll go to the first text that you see. If you hold down Shift when you do that, it'll highlight the rows. And then one of your short keys is Control D. Control D copies down any formulas. And so you see that I was able to copy that down literally without moving from my keyboard. In this instance, that's the easiest way. Another way is if I had my mouse. So again, there's people that will tell you you're not allowed to use your mouse, but I can do it just as fast that way. You can go into there. There's another way to do it. It's been a while since I've done that, but there's 2 of the 3 ways to copy that formula down. If I wanted to copy it across, again, I'm just shifting over this time. Instead of Control D, it's Control R. I'm copying that formula to the right. Again, that has saved me countless hours. And just think to yourself, if someone gives you something and they expect you to do it in 8 hours and you do it in 2, it's up to you what to do with those other 6 hours. I can tell you I didn't always use the smartest thing to do with those 6 hours, but here we are. Okay, so that's that formula, and that's copied down. Now that I have that, now I'm going to update my pivot. And this time I'm going to put month as my row, and I have my bank discount here. Okay. Now when I'm creating my template, I can, let's say I want a summary of all my sales, and I'm creating this tab. Now the 2 most important formulas that you need to know are SUMIF and VLOOKUP. Okay, so we'll do a VLOOKUP right now. VLOOKUP. Make sure you spell it right. Okay, this is the most important formula. If you have not used a VLOOKUP before, go home and do VLOOKUPs until you're doing them in your sleep. Okay, V stands for vertical. The opposite of that is HLOOKUP, is horizontal. It is how is your data set up. What we saw our data set up is a vertical setup. That's your most common, vertical, up, down, as you jump. The reason that's the most common is because that's how our brain knows to see it. You have your headers along the columns, and then your data goes down. HLOOKUP, it does happen. Sometimes you'll need that, but that's when your headers are on your rows, and then your data is going out. Okay. What the lookup saying is the first thing it's asking you is the lookup value. Okay. If Excel is going to go look up something, what is it that I want to look up? Okay. So this is normally your value here. January won't actually work because I labeled it as 1. But you're asking, what do I want to look up? In this row, I want to look up a 1. Okay, then the question is, where do you want it to look? So the rules of a VLOOKUP is that whatever data set you give it, what it's looking for has to be in the very first column. Okay, so here I said that I'm looking for the 1. The 1 has to be in the first column. Now, never reference a VLOOKUP directly. So you see here, I put the A through B. I don't want to put A2 through there, because then again, once my VLOOKUP deletes, this is going to be a reference error. Okay, so instead I'm referencing the entire column that includes the VLOOKUP, or that includes the pivot table. So that way, if I manipulate my pivot table in any direction, as long as my month is still in that column A, my VLOOKUP hasn't broken. Okay, does that make sense? If you put it on a specific cell, you refresh that pivot table gets deleted. And so these become reference errors. So always go with the column. Otherwise, next month, you're going to have to do it again. Okay. Now the question is, okay, now that I've found the 1, I found what you told me to look up, what do you want me to pull back? Okay. And in this instance, this is the month. I want you to pull back, and it's by column 2. Because remember, the first column is what it's looking up. And in this data set, the important column that I'm looking for is 2. This could be 5, 6, 100, depending on what rows you're looking for. I could add maybe the first one, maybe sales is column B, quantity is column C. You know, I can keep going on and adding stuff to it. And then my template is telling me to go pick the second column, okay? Then you have a true or false. If you don't do anything, the logic is going to assume false, which means that we need to look up for an identical match. In this instance, we want an identical match. One might be close to two, but two is a completely different field. Some reasons where you might not need an appropriate is if you're looking for a range. Okay, so let's say I had all of your grades looking up, and I'm telling you 80 to 90 is a B, 90 to 100 is an A. Here I could say, to go with an approximate match, 85 is approximately an 80, and therefore pick a B. Okay, but that's the difference between this range lookup. It's going to assume false, which means identical. And identical means identical. Text has to be text, calendar has to be calendar, numbers have to be numbers. Okay. If for some reason your numeric values are still in numbers, it's not going to read it. Okay. And I know we're nearing the end of the time, but I want to do the next one is sum if. So VLOOKUP can only pick up one value. You can only have one. Sum if I'm still looking at the range of data, I can get the same answer as this, but instead of going to the pivot table, I can go back to my my initial data set. So what I'm saying is the first value here is the range. So in this, on the sum if, you pick what range is first. What that means is where is your data? Okay, my data is, I want you to look up this column. So this is where, so sum if is, I'm summing it if the criteria is met. That criteria is based off of this range of cells where my month is. In this instance, I only want you to add it up if it's 1. And if it is 1, come back with this number. All right. And the reason that I like these formulas is because now I can set my template. Oh, because I put minute 2 in there. So that's why you don't put, you put references. All right, so that's all of my 1s, all of my 2s, 3s. Again, I get the same answer. The question is, how is your data? VLOOKUP is if it only shows up once. I couldn't do a VLOOKUP to this field because then it's just going to pick one of these numbers, the first number it comes across. I have to pull it off of this. The sum if is a little bit more flexible because it's going to go through and sum up every time that value is shown. So I could do it from the pivot table, or I can do it from the original set. All right, macros are a lot helpful, but that's a 30-minute conversation to start with. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Again, was this helpful? Are you glad that I took the time to do this instead of talk about LIFO? All right. Anything that y'all ever wanted to know about Excel that you'd like me to take a second to look at now? Just any general inquiries? Any topics you've heard of? Again, I would pick what's called a hotkey, one a week until you get to the same level of familiarity. And then move on to the functions. There's literally thousands of different formulas, different functions that Excel can do for you. And as you see here, it's not always about calculating data. Sometimes it's just about grabbing the data so you can put it in a different way. There's the time value money formulas that we have, but again, what I see most of the time is that this page will be very pretty. It'll be formatted exactly how customers want to see it. or presidents want to see it. You'll have all of your financial, you could set up a financial statement here, and you've seen my personal budget file, that how I've done it, but you can set how you want the data to look on one tab, and then have the raw, unfiltered, unmanipulated data within that field. And so where each month, all you do is go drop in your new data, and you're not spending any additional time. You go, you hit refresh on the pivot, and then these formulas automatically update, and you're done. And that's what the macro part of this class would do, is to go, you can get a macro. So any function that Excel can do, you can create a macro to record those steps. So the step of me going and opening the text file, creating it as a comma delimited, even setting the columns to date and time, then creating the pivot table. Those are all very calculated steps. If y'all are, this class is, this is in that 50. If y'all want to go ahead. I'm going to do the smart view real quick, or the macro real quick. I just always forget where's. Okay. If I wanted to record a macro to do everything that I just did, let me start from scratch. See that I don't use the ribbon that much anymore. View macro, if I want to create one, I'm now recording everything that I do right now. It's going to save it. So if I go hit open, testing, because I'm in testing, that's why. Sorry. When you're creating a macro, and I know I just didn't do it, but the first thing to do with the macro is to always start with a blank workbook. So that way you have your workbook that all the macros are saved to, and then you have the workbooks that are either input to the macro or are output from the macro. And anytime you move the files, again, I'm telling you, I'm recording my steps. Those steps are tagged to the location that file is in. If you move that file, it's going to mess up your recorded steps. So always, I like to create a folder, save a blank Excel workbook into that folder. Any file that I want my macros to go pull from, I keep saved in that folder. That way, if I move that folder, the macro moves with it, and then I don't have to go and retag everything. But what I'm saying is, if I'm creating this macro is built to go find this file that I call testing. It's set it as a tab delimited. It's going to delete the first column. It's going to insert this into a pivot table with my date and bank discount. It's going to save this file as an Excel in my documents as testing done. It's going to save it. It's going to close it. And that's the end of my macro. Okay, so when I go to my documents, I can see this testing file done. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to run this macro. You see it went and just did exactly what I told it to do, which was to open this text file, put it into a pivot, save it, and you're done. Okay. So that's a very simple 3-step process, but you can see My monthly process is to pull the trial balance from QuickBooks, save it to this desktop, go in and change these filters, do this, again, create this very pretty template of a trial balance that all pulls from this data. I'd have to have an entire employee dedicated to just building that file each month. And now all I have to do is go hit this button every time. I have to have my accounting information system to export the same trial balance in the same format as it did last month to a file. Again, I put it into this folder. If I keep that folder the same and I just change it, I have my working folder as my working folder. And then when I'm done with it, I save it, copy of it as January. Then I go in and do it again as February. I save a copy of it as February. Each month, when I'm done working with it, I save it and then move on to the next month. But I basically created to where instead of going through this all again, I just go in and click that button and then I'm done. You can see. Last part of it, and if you don't know Visual Basics, and again, I'm not a Visual Basics expert, but I learned enough based off of my macros. If something changed, anything changed, it's going to kick off an error. You can go into the macro, and this is literally step by step what I just did. This is in your Visual Basics C++, for those who have that language. You don't need to, because you can kind of pick up enough, create pivot table. You can get a feel of what it's doing without really doing anything. Let's say this is my pivot table. You can see it's grabbing this field. You can see here I'm filing, I'm creating the file. I can go in and I can change that name there. Or if my input file changed, if instead of testing, it's called testing123, at the top, I can tell that it's saying go open this file. I can simply change the name of that there. I don't expect you to have Visual Basics. Again, I've never taken a computer language course, but there's enough of it in English to where I can go in and change the few things that have changed to where I'm not starting from scratch. Another common thing is when you're creating these big macros, to go in and do one step at a time. So this one I did 3 steps at once. Traditionally, I would take my time. I would have one macro to go open the file, one macro to go create the pivot table, one macro to go save the file. Then I would have one macro that goes and does each of those macros. The reason for that is because if one of those pieces fail, I can redo that one piece instead of having either you'd have to come in here and know enough to figure out what changed and edit it, or I can just refilm that one piece and then go and then reset it to go into each step. So I don't want to get too complicated. I know I'm past my hour. So y'all have a great weekend. I'll stick around if y'all have any questions, and y'all have Friday Zooms if you need me. Oh, Excel. Oh, wait, I'm still recording. So yeah, just do Parlez-vous Excel. Parlez-vous Excel. Do you speak Excel? You see that?